I've had people tell me stories where someone will walk into their office and say, well, you're done. You need to go. Mm-hmm. There's no room for you here. Well, yeah, you've gotten great performance reviews, but we're going to let you go. But you'd feel like there is no future. So dipping into opportunity, personal responsibility, you really have an opportunity here to turn this around and say, just because I'm being treated unfairly doesn't mean that I am that person, that I am what they say I am. And I'm going to find the value that I represent, that I deliver, and I'm going to find the people who appreciate it because they're out there. If I'm out there, they're out there. And that's how I'm going to recover from this and chart a new course for myself.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and a little bit about yourself?
So, first of all, great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I come to this in a very strange way. I am not your typical career coach, most of whom tend to come out of recruiting and HR, and that's great. But I come out of industry, and a really strange industry. I was in the entertainment business as a film studio executive and a film producer for 35 years. Took a kind of a sabbatical out in the 90s to get into technology. I've always been a bit of an early adopter, a computer geek. So I started a company with a partner, and we ran it up into the bubble and raised money and did all of that stuff and had great clients and projects. And then 2001, the bubble burst, we burst with it. And I was faced with this crazy decision about what am I going to do next? And as it turned out, I decided to go back to school, earn a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which led me to go back into the film business in a very strange capacity, working at DreamWorks Animation, but in a people-oriented role, not a production-oriented role, which is what I had been doing. And that kind of got me into education and training and human potential. And round about 2012, I was invited to do a TEDx talk. The topic of the day was transformation. And I said to them, well, do you want to talk about what's going on in the entertainment business and all the transformation and digital disruption that's been going on? They said, you can talk about whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And I'd been following the difficulties that older generations were having, recovery from the recession, retirement savings.
So this was about 1 year. So you said
this is 2012.
2012. Okay, very good.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I decided I've got some background in surviving tumultuous times in my career, having been fired a lot, and have my psychology skills. So I put together a game plan for people to reinvent their careers in midlife, late life, and stay involved, stay engaged, stay employed, start their own businesses, whatever that might be. And that led to people coming to me and saying, do you coach? And I said, well, I guess I got something here. So that's when I started my practice. So I've been doing this now for about 12 years. Okay. And it's gone through various iterations. Published a book on the topic in 2017 called Boomer Reinvention, How to Create Your Dream Career Over 50. And I work with people across all industries because this is really not about anything that's industry specific. This is really about building resilience and awareness about how to sustain your career in troubled times.
I see. Well, let me ask you this. During your transition at age 50, did you ever feel pressured to compromise your ideals or values to reestablish your career? That's my first question. And how did you handle those situations?
Yes. And I think part of the equation when you're 50 that's maybe different from when you're 30 is that the temptation to compromise, at least for me, is significantly less because at 50, you have a sense of what you give up when you try to compromise your deeply held values, because life experience kind of kicks you in the butt if you try to shave it a little bit.
It's true. Absolutely. I would agree with you. Absolutely. I think about where I am now, 50 plus, right? Versus where I am. And I think there's wisdom that you gain. There's just a deeper wisdom that you have in not compromising, right? Which is the passion behind this whole podcast that fell into my lap, is that I truly wanted the next generation, as well as our peers, to be inspired by the fact that the path that you have and where you want to go, whether you're reinventing after 50 or whether you're in the middle of creating that path, that definitely you do not have to compromise who you are professionally or personally.
Right.
So that's very interesting. Well, let me ask you that.
I just want to add something to that, which is
What?
that it really is, how to say this, it's kind of inverted in the sense that the more you compromise, the worse things get. And I think perhaps, and this is maybe immaturity, there's always the sense of, oh, if I could just kind of like squeeze something in here, no one will notice.
Yeah.
I can get away with this. And it's true, you can get away with things up to a point for a certain amount of time. I like to say in my practice that to create the future, you have to reconcile the past. And we accumulate baggage as human beings over the course of our lives, decisions that we make that we don't feel good about, bridges that we've burned, people have done us wrong, perhaps we've done other people wrong. At some point, you have to kind of, as I say, reconcile your past. You have to come to some acceptance of what you've done, of what you like about yourself, what you don't like about yourself, and be able to move on from that. And I think what I learned in my spiritual psychology program is the concept of self-forgiveness. And I think that shame is a big driver for a lot of people. They try to kind of cover over their shame. Brene Brown, I'm sure you know her work, has just been a phenomenal voice for this question of self-forgiveness and reconciling shame and really kind of standing up for who we are as individuals. So anyway, I just want to kind of add that note to anyone who might think that I can still kind of get by. I don't really have to look at this too closely. It's going to come back and affect your life if you don't, particularly in midlife, try to reconcile all of those issues.
Absolutely. We all know there's no growth in shame or condemnation. That is something that we just cannot walk by or live by. And here's another question I have. So in developing leadership training, John, and recruiting programs at DreamWorks Animation, I want to go back to DreamWorks Animation. Did you encounter any situations where you had to balance company goals with your personal values? And then how did you manage that balance?
Yeah, I was very fortunate at DreamWorks because it was a company. First of all, it's a family entertainment company, DreamWorks Animation. So the question of what we were creating there and who we were creating that for was very much a part of life there every day. Cool. So it was a kind of a happy place in that sense that we all knew that we were trying to create uplifting entertainment for families. And as a result, all of the projects really had to embody positive goals and role models and characters and stories and myths. And so that kind of made it easy from a values standpoint because we were all really trying to adhere to positive ideals in the work that we were doing.
How were you trying to implement those positive ideals? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, the nature of the company was to, again, create family entertainment. So those ideals were all through the stories, the ideas, the characters, the designs, how this was being developed on all levels. So that really was never much of a question for any of us in terms of the work that I was doing, which was to evangelize our content and our methodology to universities. We were doing this recruiting program that I spearheaded to bring in young people into the company. It made it easy, right? I don't think we had anyone ever. We would go to a school who would say, I have an issue with Kung Fu Panda. Right. Again, it just made it easy. And there really were just tremendous opportunities for people to be creative and to really find their best selves through the work that they were doing because they knew that And we'd go to screenings and we'd see families come in. We'd see kids love the characters, and we'd see the fan mail or whatever. So we would take costume versions of the characters to the screenings, the premieres, and just you see this at Disneyland, right? You see the way kids just go up to the characters and they just love Minnie Mouse and all that. And we had a little bit of that. I mean, Disney has, of course, a much deeper bench than we did at DreamWorks. But having said that, there's still a great amount of goodwill for that kind of work. So
absolutely,
it was great.
And so you being a part of that leadership, everything cascades down from the leadership or cascades up, depending if you're working from the inverted triangle versus, the right side triangle, which the inverted triangle is more of what I like to talk about. It's more servant leadership. So in that, how did your position, impact a lot of those decisions from the leadership? And when you faced any dilemmas of compromising within the organization, how did you address those? What strategies did you provide to the people from a leadership standpoint? Because I know that impacted, of course, the innovation and the creativity that came out of DreamWorks.
Right. Uh-huh. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you invoke the idea of servant leadership. Making movies is a tough profession. Those animated movies that you take your kids to see and if you stay to watch the credits, you'll see the sheer number of people that are involved in bringing those films to life. Tough work. Long hours. Lots of intense creative decisions about really what would seem to be very minute issues. The color of your shirt versus my shirt. Do we want those two blues to be in the same frame? What about the lighting? I mean, all these kinds of questions, aesthetics, story. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's tough to manage that, right? People get into arguments about this. People hold their convictions about art and storytelling very deeply. You want that. You want that healthy exchange of ideas. The abiding principle that I tried to promote when we would get into those kinds of dilemmas, conversations, conundrums about, well, how are we going to deliver this on time to meet our release date when we don't have this figured out? And, this person wants to go in one direction and this person wants to go in a different direction. And that principle is that we work for the artists. They don't work for us. And that at the end of the day, we may sign their paychecks and we may insist on certain rules and regulations of how you work in a company like this. But at the end of the day, if we don't have the artists and the technologists, we don't have a company, we don't have a product. So that became very, very much, for me personally, an important guiding principle. And I felt that it was important to support and encourage the creative community at the company to step up, feel empowered, and train one another and share information amongst themselves that would foster more creativity, more engagement, more critical thinking, really, so that they did not feel like, oh man, we're on deadline here. How am I going to get through this day? Yeah, okay, fine. What else do you need? Okay, I'll do it.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. We talked about servant leadership, and I think there's times, I think what makes dynamic leaders is when you can change your leadership approach, whether you're using the collaboration models, servant or transformation model, which I believe that part of not compromising yourself professionally is always knowing which leadership model you need at any given point. Can you give me examples of some transformation leadership that came from you as well as the executive staff where you had to make some tough decisions within the organization? And then also, I want to get to your book as well, but I do want you to answer that question too.
Here's an interesting conjunction that happened. at DreamWorks. And this was because of external events, right? We were in the middle of a recession, 2008. This was a company that had gone public, that was in a very difficult business model for a public company. This was a company that was making 2 or 3, tried to make 4 very expensive films and release these films every year into a very crowded market that was changing a lot. It was a company, and it was a kind of a sector of the business, animation, that was very bolstered by the DVD business and the sale and rental of DVDs all through the 90s into the beginning of the 2000s. Well, with online streaming, that DVD business went away pretty quickly.
Absolutely. I could see that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the business model was really challenged. There was a squeeze on all sides. And I think that the business decision that the leadership had at that time was a smart one, which is like, we've got to find, and this has happened throughout the entertainment business, and you've seen this all over the place. We've got to find intellectual property, IP, that is solid, is known to our audience, and we have to basically mine each successful franchise for all of the possible revenue we can. So all of the Marvel movies, for example, perfect example of that. How do you extend that brand and monetize it? And that was the goal of DreamWorks. Shrek was the beginning of it. Madagascar, those movies were a continuation. Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon. These became staples of that business. The risk in doing that is that you kind of dilute the creative inspiration, the freshness of your team, because they're basically doing the same thing in different forms over and over again. There's very little room for innovation. You have to try to innovate within that franchise. So, this gets into it. We could talk about this for hours. This gets into a whole other question. But you can imagine what some of those difficulties are. I'll just cut to the chase and say that the company lost talent, whether because people quit or because people were fired, because they either just couldn't bring themselves to stay with the line, or they weren't particularly good at it, right? I was one of those people who wound up leaving. Because what I saw about all of the work that I was doing was that it was coming to an end, was that the spirit that had motivated them to hire me and had given me free rein to put these programs together, and which were very successful, the climate changed.
Right.
And
So,
and I'll tell you a funny story about this, which is I actually went to the COO to whom I reported at one point in 2009, and things were going great. All the programs were going well, but I knew that we were shifting gears and that we were going into a more kind of a programmatic approach to the business. And I said to her, look, this is a strange question, but is there anything left for me to do around here? And she turned beet red. And she said, I will answer the question. She said, but I have to, but first I want to say, we love you. You've done an amazing job here. No one could have done this, other than you. You've helped us through this amazing period. Having said that, I think the answer is probably no. So back to your question about leadership, I think part of leadership as represented in that situation requires, and I don't know what model this is of leadership, but I think it certainly requires a clear eye and a willingness to take your personal considerations out of the equation and really look at what are the factors that are going on here, right? What's the reality of the situation objectively? And you don't have to turn this into a drama, right? it's not a dramatic situation. It's not like anyone did anything wrong. Times change, externalities change.
Mhm.
The key is, and this goes back to my spiritual psychology training, your attitude about the issue is the issue.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you're faced with a dilemma like this, where I'm seeing that I'm kind of at the end of my usefulness, I saw it earlier than they did, right? But if I had kind of hid in my office and pretended that things weren't coming to an end, they would have figured it out probably quite soon after I did and come to me and said, well, we're sorry about this. Yeah. I could have played the victim. I could have said, you don't recognize the value that I've provided for this company. Isn't that worth something? And isn't that worth your loyalty? And so we can tend to over dramatize situations, take it personally, not see the value, and not be willing to reframe the situation.
Wow.
So this is for me a question of personal leadership, I guess, and this is something that I talk about and work on with my clients who are experiencing these kinds of transitions.
Very
to be
good.
able to recognize where responsibility needs to be taken, and how you can look at events as a victim, or you can look at events
as an opportunity.
As an opportunity.
I think what this is leading to is showing how you created an opportunity for yourself after DreamWorks. And I think that is the bigger play here. So in combating ageism, okay.
Yeah.
And I did see your interview years ago. I think it was on Good Morning America, or was it on
CBS This Morning?
CBS This Morning. I did see that interview. But in combating ageism, have you or your clients had to navigate scenarios where maintaining personal integrity was challenging, which I think you've been sharing a little bit of that. And can you share any specific examples around that?
Dealing with ageism, it's a kick in the stomach. You can't believe that you're hearing what you're hearing. You can't believe that someone with a straight face is either talking around the issue or somehow disguising the issue, but plainly seeing you as some kind of other. And making all sorts of assumptions about who you are, what you believe, what you're good at, what you're not good at. So, as with other situations where we're dealing with bias, there is this tendency to collapse inside. It's a mixture of hurt, anger, real sense of reality falling apart. Everything that you think you know about yourself is in question. And it has a very, very damaging effect on your psyche, on your motivation. Because remember, if you're in your 50s and someone says to you, well, it's time to go, you should be retiring now. And it gets worse in terms of the shade that gets thrown at you.
Mm-hmm.
People will actually say, well, you're done. I've had people tell me stories where someone will walk into their office and say, well, you're done. You need to go. Mm-hmm. There's no room for you here. Well, yeah, you've gotten great performance reviews, but we're going to let you go. Mm-hmm. People don't do it quite that boldly because there is a risk of age-based discrimination and filing a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. They're much more subtle about it. Mm-hmm. But you'd feel like there is no future. So dipping into opportunity, personal responsibility, you really have an opportunity here to turn this around and say, just because I'm being treated unfairly doesn't mean that I am that person, that I am what they say I am. And I'm going to find the value that I represent, that I deliver. And I'm going to find the people who appreciate it because they're out there. If I'm out there, they're out there. And that's how I'm going to recover from this and chart a new course for myself.
When I think of the most functional organizations, and what I mean the most healthy functional organizations, I've asked some previous guests who I call them the pioneers of making sure that diversity was a part of the organizational structure, especially at the leadership table. One definition of diversity is creativity. And I think a lot of times we can lose this sense of the fact that ageism, actually, you can't do anything without the seasonality and the wisdom of someone who has been there before. I believe that
one would hope,
right? But then also that it also adds to the diverse table of creating of having the creativity that you need to come out with the next best idea, strategy, product, whatever it may be, right? Because what we want to do is create a table that looks like the marketplace.
That's right.
Right? And the marketplace definitely has different demographics, socioeconomics, whether it's racial, religious, whether it's geographical. We want a table that looks like the marketplace. So your answer reminded me of just a lot of conversations that I've had with previous guests as well.
Yeah. And the marketplace is getting older, right? We are in an age bubble. There are more people age 65 and up today than there have ever been in this country. And those numbers are continuing to skew. So employers are just starting to figure out that they don't have the pool of talented younger people that they had 10 years ago. And it is going to serve them to tap into the pool of older talented people who are out there continuing to work, continuing to provide, value, insight, strategy, experience, wisdom, as you were saying. So I think we are on the cusp of what I hope is a quiet revolution in the workforce, which is going to rebalance this inequality that we have been experiencing regarding age and make some improvements.
I could not agree with you more. And, the industries that I have worked in, especially the one that we are in now, I think it's imperative. It's imperative. I think we have a lot of emerging talent, coming through the ranks, emerging leadership, but they definitely want to mix with those that can bring the wisdom and the seasonality who've been there before. And that are open to new ideas as well, because I think that's a part of our responsibility as well in that age group. So building a strong network, John, often requires navigating, complex social dynamics. Have you ever had to compromise your principles in networking situations? What advice do you give to clients facing similar challenges in this?
No, I've never been faced with a situation where I had to compromise. There's always someone else, right? If you get into a bad situation with someone in some kind of a networking capacity, move on, right? There's nothing that's keeping you tied to that person. You may think, oh my goodness, this person's so well connected and they can introduce me to lots of people who need what I do. But let's take an obvious situation. There's some predation going on there. It's like a quid pro quo. I'll help introduce you to these people, but let's go out on a date. You don't have to do that. You don't have to compromise yourself to get ahead. Particularly today, where everything is so much more transparent, and we're paying much more attention to these issues. When it comes to, particularly to older workers and navigating the workforce, look, I think networking is, as they say, your network is your net worth. It is the number one way to combat ageism, because ageism is going to occur when you try to go in the front door, send a resume to apply for a job that you saw online. You are one of 250 on average applicants to that job. The recruiters don't have time to kind of figure you out or take you seriously. You need to build relationships and stop chasing job openings. So networking is your number one asset. The best way to get over your fear of networking or your reluctance to network, the awkwardness of networking, is to know who you are and know what you deliver, to have what I call the superpower, which is that particular unique combination of skills, experiences, preferences, utility, personality, values that go into the way you show up for work and how you deliver value to your employer, your client. If you can articulate that value and put that on your LinkedIn profile as your headline, about section, run it through your experience section, which is your online resume, then you have something to talk about. Then you can stand on that clear career narrative that you have created, and you've got that to work with, to promote, or just to use to ask questions, because you want to be an explorer. You want to be curious about the people that you meet. You want to find others who kind of intersect with what you do in complementary ways, who can help connect you to other people who have a like-minded view of your industry, of the world, of how you perform, what your values are, et cetera. And that's the formula.
Tell me a little bit more about the success of your clients who've taken that advice from you.
Well, I would say that most of the people that I work with are stuck in a period of not knowing, the divine unknowing of how to take everything that they have learned and done and translate it into this next phase of life. Because what seems to happen, and this is a psychological phenomenon, when you kind of slay that first set of dragons, or you've climbed that first mountain, there's another mountain on the other side of it. And you get to that mid-career point where you've established your career, you've established your personal life, maybe family, kids, income, house. You've kind of figured out who you are, and you're kind of dining out on that. Now what? When you get to midlife, you tend to be a little bit more introspective. This is why we have this thing called the midlife crisis, talked about for many years, right? You think, well, who am I? And what am I doing here? And what's it all about? And some people react, dramatically to this, and will act out and do crazy stuff and get divorced or quit their jobs. And I certainly advocate for a much more measured approach to this period, and to not do anything precipitous around your midlife crisis or your mid-career crisis, but to take this as an opportunity to reflect. So that really is a very important part of the work that I do with people, is to get them out of this idea of, well, there's got to be a job out there that I'm good for, and I've done all this, and I'm looking at this job and this company and that company, and maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. And I say to them, take a breath, look inside, reevaluate all of those questions about who you think you are, who you've become, because you're different now than you were 20, 30 years ago when you started out. Who are you, man? Let's run the inventory on what you've become and use that as a baseline for who you want to be. And once you've figured that out, it's not about, this is to your question about compromise, it's not about sitting yourself into someone else's idea of what the job is or what they want, because guess what? Most people, when they're asked to put together a job description for an open position that they have, hate that. No one wants to fill a position. It's the worst thing for a manager to do. I've done it a lot. You just want to get on with it. So you don't really pay attention to the specifics of the job description. You just want that right person to walk into your office and say, I'm here. And you go, oh my God, you're perfect. Everyone's going to love you. You know enough about the job. You can learn anything you need to do to kind of get up to speed, but you're the person. So you want to build those relationships, right? So that through the engagement with people, they will say, oh, you'd be perfect for this. Oh, I need to introduce you to this person. Have you ever heard about this company? It's like, no. Well, have you ever heard about this role? No. Well, why do you think I'd be good for that? Well, because of this, this, and this. And you talk about this in your profile. It's like, oh, wow, I never thought of applying myself to that particular function. So I'm describing in aggregate a lot of the insights and the epiphanies that the clients that I work with go through as they're kind of reevaluating where they've been, where they want to go, what they're good at, what they don't want to do. What's your deal breakers list? All right. Some people will say, I'm done traveling. I don't want to get on another plane for as long as I live. Other people say, the kids are out of the house. I love traveling. I've never had a chance to travel. I would love to be in a role where I get to travel. Other people say, I'm too opinionated, and I've run into a lot of problems because I've got so many opinions. And sometimes my opinions are right, and sometimes they're wrong. But my manners sometimes rubs people the wrong way. I need to be doing my own thing. It's like, okay, well, let's look at that. What does that look like? Well, I'm scared because I've never done this before. Okay, well, let's look at your fear. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be successful. Well, have you ever failed before? Well, no, not really. I've done pretty well. Well, what makes you think you're going to fail now when 20, 30 years in, you've got more track record, capability, wisdom, knowledge, training than ever before? Why would you fail now? Oh, well, that's an interesting line. I never thought about it that way. So these are some of the kinds of examples of dialogue that goes on in this process to help people kind of regain this sense of, oh, yeah, I can do it. And just the final point on it is so much of this comes out of this simple reversal of not looking at fitting into a job, of not looking at all those rejections that you get from just trying to find a job that's out there and pulling it back into yourself and really reimagining, recommitting to the value that you already represent.
What's really interesting in what you're saying is, we're talking about a form of confidence, regaining a certain amount of confidence in this latter part of our lives, right? And knowing that we don't focus on the rejection, but we continually focus on what we have to offer. And with today's marketplace, there's so many creative ways to recreate your career, and that's because of technology. That's just because of just the change of the landscape. But I find it very interesting. It really does start here, and keeping it here,
and here, right? In terms of what we're seeing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
There's a wonderful Jungian analogy around this that I use a lot, which is the analogy of the sundial. If you think of yourself as a sundial, casting a shadow, in the morning of your life, you cast this long shadow on the ground. But as the sun climbs to midday, the middle of your life, that shadow retreats to the point where at midday with the sun directly overhead, you do not cast a shadow. That shadow is your reference point for your identity in the metaphor. So, of course, in midlife, you don't know who you are. And you are desperately trying to find that shadow again. Where's that shadow that used to be my benchmark, right? My reference point for who I am. Well, in the afternoon of your life, you begin to cast a shadow again, but it's in a different direction.
Right.
So if you're looking for that shadow that's disappeared from the morning, you're not going to find it. You have to pivot. You have to turn around to see where the shadow is now lengthening into the afternoon. And as the afternoon progresses, and this is emotional for me to think about it in these terms, as you age, that shadow, that reference point, that new identity becomes stronger. So you have in midlife so much to look forward to in this second half of your life because of that lengthening shadow, that lengthening reference point, that strengthening of your identity.
That's really great. That's really good, John. So true. Very good. I find that extremely motivating, inspirational on several different levels. So it's a great analogy. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and we'll end from there. But in the face of job loss, did you or anyone ever feel pressured to take roles that did not align?
Oh, yeah.
With personal values just to stay afloat?
Absolutely,
How
yes.
can professionals avoid this trap? Because it is a trap. It's not a trap. I mean, this is not age discriminatory. I mean, this is across the board.
Absolutely.
Young families to more seasoned families. So
yeah. I think it's a trap at any age. I think each age is going to experience it from a different perspective. Um, so, and I certainly have a story about that. There was a job that I took. I was in it for 6 months. I lost the job before that. Kind of my fault. I kind of got disillusioned with the role. It really wasn't. I thought it was something I wanted to do, but it really wasn't. And I kind of left that role. It was a contract role, so I was done with the contract. I got rushed. I got rushed by this company, by the CEO of this company, and he was, he painted this great picture of what the role was, et cetera. The problem was he was based in New York. The job was based in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The guy in the LA office had no interest in me, what I was doing, and he basically wanted me out from the first day that I was there. Plus, the culture of the company was just totally incompatible for me, just the way they did business. It wasn't that they were dishonest or out of integrity. It was just very, very different. So one Monday morning, almost 6 months to the day after I joined, calls me into his office, the LA manager, and he says, almost without looking up, says, "Today's your last day. I want you to pack up your desk. We're going to escort you out of the building. We'll send you your check on Friday." I was crushed. I was ashamed. And I didn't talk about this for years. I left this job off my resume. I thought 6 months, it's not going to show up. I made a mistake. It was terrible. Getting fired, people say, "You've been fired a lot. Does it ever get any easier?" And my answer is no, it never gets easier. But you do learn how to come back from it. You do learn how to deal with it.
Well, I think you're also the perfect example of going through adversity where, part of you coming back from it. I mean, I look at, and which the last question is going to be about your book, but I think about how you constantly went to a whole nother level that maybe you would not have gone to if you had not been going through.
Right. Well, but your question about compromise and about values and about the trap of taking the wrong job. So part of this, I would say, first of all, is don't beat yourself up if you take the wrong job, because you're going to learn from this experience. Next time, you're not going to do this again. Hopefully, you're not too damaged from the experience.
Right.
We can't always know what that wrong job is. We spend a lot of time, just as much time, worrying about whether we're taking the wrong job as if we're taking the right job, or not getting the right job. So I just want to kind of set the ground rules that it's all okay, right? Don't beat yourself up for having made that mistake. We all have to make that mistake. What you can do, though, in preparing for it and try to minimize the chances of that happening, is to balance this sense of, I need a job, I need to put food on the table, oh my God, I'm running out of time. Try not to get yourself into that situation in the first place. So if you have a job right now, make sure that you are keeping up with your network. Make sure that you have a really clear LinkedIn profile that talks about your value. Make sure that you are meeting new people in your industry every week so that you have a resource to rely on when you need it. So you're not in that situation where you're going to have to jump. So there's a certain amount of preparation and preemption that you can do for this. If you get yourself into a bad job, I would not stay in that job and hope for the best. If you're in there and it's a month and it's like, oh, this is not getting any better, this is kind of going in the wrong direction, don't just kind of tune everything out and try to grin and bear it. Start making those moves privately, subtly, discreetly, to find something else. Don't let it get to the point that I let it get to, where I had my blinders on, I didn't see it coming stupidly, and it hit me on the head. The lesson that I learned there is probably what inspired me or gave me the insight at DreamWorks to go to them and say, hey, is this done? Am I done here? Because I didn't want to be in a situation where they fired me. I would rather quit, right? And walk out with my head high and with goodwill from the company because I did them a favor. I went in and I said, this is not working any longer, is it? And they said, well, no, not really. It's not about you. It's about us, whatever. We were civilized about it. We were friendly about it. They kept inviting me to all the parties. I mean, it was great. Not so much for the first example, right? Where I made that mistake. So I'm saying there are ways that we can empower ourselves so that we're not on the hook like that, and we're not so subject to the whims of bad employers or jobs that don't really align with who we are.
Right. I think a key word, for any age group, what you just said is empowering ourselves. And you gave the examples of how to continue to empower yourself. Meet new people in your industry. Networking is important. Making sure that you never become so complacent in your job. Using the old cliche, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure you understand just the far-reaching, avenues that you have that you have access to. Understand your accessibility. Understand your access. Right. So that's good. That's great. So here's my last question. I want to respect your time, but when I think of your book, Boomer Reinvention, first of all, how is it being used currently in the marketplace? What are you doing with it? Where do you want it to go? Are you in the midst of what's the next thing? Are you in the midst of writing another book? What do you want to leave my listeners with?
Right. Well, I'm sure there's another book in there. I've got lots of ideas for other books. I haven't put pen to paper, as it were, yet. The one story that I wanted to tell from that book, which I thought was so inspiring, was about a woman named Julie Murphy, who was a corporate lawyer, who found herself in a succession of toxic work environments with medium to large corporations. Whether the leadership was going off in different directions, whether in one of the cases there was a supervisor who was very, very difficult to work with, she kind of created a second life for herself in personal growth and meditation. And she felt that was her refuge, that she would come home, meditate. She would go on retreats on the weekends. She was, studying all sorts of ways of calming herself and really focusing positively and trying to provide a counterbalance to the experience that she was having at work. And this was an uneasy balance for her for many years. And she went to a training, and I don't know if it was the facilitator or another participant who said to her, you really don't have to live this way. You really don't have to compromise half of your life so that you can live successfully in the other half. There is a way for you to have it all and live a professional life that relies on and is based on your personal growth values and the way you see the world. And so she began to take this to heart and set up a plan to set up her own consulting business. She had some real world issues to arrange. She had a daughter who was graduating high school. She wanted to get her daughter off to college. And once that was complete, she prepared her LLC. She was a lawyer, so she knew how to do all this stuff for herself. And she quit her job and decided to go out and become a consultant around bringing positive mindsets, personal growth into business situations and in working with businesses. Was a trainer and a facilitator. And it was slow going, but she made it happen, and she has gone on to do this as a successful profession now in the intervening 10 or so years. And I thought that was a wonderful example of reinvention and of standing up for your principles. And it goes back to kind of what we were saying at the beginning, which is that if you don't do this, when the call comes in midlife and mid-career, you run the risk of leading an embittered life that is shortened by the stress and the disconnection between the part of you that really knows what your values are and the part of you that is, I don't want to say living a lie. It's not necessarily that you're living a lie, but the part of you that is not honoring that deeper value-driven part of you.
And what she did, and what you've been talking about through this time that we've had together, is that she took everything from her past, all the experiences, and that's why she was able to reinvent to what she's doing today, which is a true success story. We build upon everything. We talked about meditation. For me, it's prayer and meditation, from a Christian standpoint. That's our value system here at our home. And one thing that we always have to deal with, is always reconciling ourselves back to understanding, yes, what our pitfalls were, but knowing that we will also be propelled to the next level of the next blessing that God has for us. So I just appreciate your time today. It has been very informative, and I am so just so glad that your team reached out to us to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I love the questions. I love going into these deeper areas of life and work, and I think that's what makes it all worthwhile, right?
Absolutely.
Is to be able to appreciate our lives from this angle, and that's the gift of getting older.
It is. That is the gift, because it is a blessing. So, absolutely. So, thank you, John. Thank you.
Pleasure.